Gabrielle Wilson, billionaire CEO of Wilson Tech Solutions, stands stunned as flight attendant Heather demands her first-class boarding pass again. Other passengers board past her while whispering. Then Gabrielle smiles unexpectedly. Within 90 seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupts into chaos no one could have predicted. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Can you imagine being worth billions and still facing discrimination? Let's see what happens next. Gabrielle Wilson wasn't born into wealth or privilege. At 43, the brilliant CEO of Wilson Tech Solutions had built her empire from nothing but determination and vision. Her company, now valued at over $4.5 billion, specialized in cybersecurity solutions that protected half of America's Fortune 500 companies. Today, however, none of that seemed to matter as she stood in the boarding line at Atlanta International Airport. The merger negotiations waiting for her in San Francisco represented the culmination of 5 years of strategic planning. Worth approximately $500 million, this deal would cement her legacy and create the largest black-owned tech conglomerate in American history. Gabrielle had prepared meticulously for weeks, reviewing documents until the early morning hours, fine-tuning presentations, and coaching her team on responses to potential objections. She'd chosen comfort for the 5-hour flight, designer jeans that cost more than some people's monthly rent, a simple white silk blouse, and a cashmere cardigan. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore minimal jewelry, just diamond studs and her mother's wedding band. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed billionaire, but everything about her exuded quiet confidence and polish. The airport experience had already tested her patience. Despite having TSA pre-check, she'd been pulled aside for a random security check, her Louis Vuitton carry-on inspected piece by piece. In the duty-free shop, a security guard had followed her closely between aisles, pretending to organize merchandise. Gabrielle had grown accustomed to these indignities. They were as familiar as breathing. It's just another day, she reminded herself, taking a deep centering breath as the gate agent called for first-class boarding. Heather Morris stood at the entrance to the jet bridge, scanning boarding passes with practiced efficiency. At 58, the white flight attendant had dedicated 30 years to coastal airlines, starting back when it was still called American Regional. She took pride in upholding standards and procedures, viewing herself as the last defense against the declining civility of air travel. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a strand out of place, much like her rigid worldview. As Gabrielle approached, boarding pass and ID in hand, Heather's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Boarding pass, please," she requested, despite the document already being extended toward her. Gabrielle complied, accustomed to the extra scrutiny. Heather examined the pass longer than she had for previous passengers, her eyes darting between the document and Gabrielle's face. "This is for first class," Heather stated, her tone suggesting a question. "Yes, it is," Gabrielle confirmed pleasantly, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I'll need to see your ID again," Heather insisted, though she'd already verified it. Behind Gabrielle, the boarding line grew longer. People shifted impatiently, some watching the interaction with interest, others absorbed in their phones. Among them, Trevor Hayes, a prominent tech journalist for the Digital Edge, recognized Gabrielle immediately. Having interviewed her twice for feature articles, he knew exactly who she was and what she had accomplished. He observed the interaction with growing concern, subtly removing his phone to document what was unfolding. As Heather continued to scrutinize her credentials, Gabrielle felt the familiar weight of exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, though she'd had little sleep preparing for tomorrow's negotiations, but the soul-deep weariness of constantly having to prove she belonged in spaces where people who looked like her were rare. She thought back to the hotel in Tokyo last month, where staff had directed her to the service entrance despite her reservation for the presidential suite. The restaurant in Manhattan where the maitre d' had asked if she was looking for the staff entrance. The board meeting in London where she'd been mistaken for a secretary. Each incident had been handled with the same grace and composure she displayed now, but the cumulative effect was corrosive. The other first-class passengers filed past, some averting their eyes from the uncomfortable scene, others watching with barely concealed interest. An elderly white couple, the Johnsons, exchanged concerned glances. A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, Bradley Thompson, smirked slightly as he passed. A younger white woman, Karen Bennett, pursed her lips disapprovingly at the delay Gabrielle was causing. What none of them knew was that Coastal Airlines had a troubling history of similar incidents. 3 discrimination lawsuits in the past 5 years had been quietly settled out of court, with victims signing non-disclosure agreements. The airline's diversity statistics were among the worst in the industry, with less than 7% of executives being people of color, and an even smaller percentage in senior cabin crew positions. Carlos Rodriguez, another flight attendant helping with the boarding process, recognized Gabrielle immediately. His cousin worked in IT at Wilson Tech Solutions and had spoken often about the company's exceptional benefits and Gabrielle's leadership. But as a relatively new hire still on probation, Carlos remained silent, watching Heather's behavior with growing discomfort. "Is there a problem?" Gabrielle finally asked, her voice calm but firm. "Just following procedure," Heather replied coolly. "We need to be thorough." Gabrielle nodded, understanding the unspoken message perfectly. No matter her wealth, accomplishments, or status, to some people, she would always be viewed as someone who didn't belong. "I've verified your boarding pass twice now, but something doesn't seem right," Heather said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure you're in the correct boarding group?" Gabrielle maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened slightly. "Yes, I'm sure. I'm in first class, seat 2A. As shown on my boarding pass." "Which you've checked?" "Twice." Behind her, Trevor Hayes continued recording discreetly, his journalistic instincts on high alert. He'd covered stories about discriminatory treatment in the service industry before, but rarely had he witnessed such a blatant example involving someone of Gabrielle's stature. "It's just that we have very specific boarding procedures," Heather continued, her tone condescending as if explaining to a child. "First class is typically for our executive travelers." The implication hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Gabrielle's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that the barb had landed. "I'm quite familiar with your boarding procedures," Gabrielle responded. "I fly this route approximately twice monthly. I've been a platinum member for over a decade." As this exchange continued, Carlos Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably at his position by the aircraft door. He desperately wanted to intervene, to acknowledge Gabrielle and welcome her properly, but Heather's seniority and reputation for reporting insubordination kept him silent. He'd seen how she'd pushed for the termination of another flight attendant who had questioned her judgment regarding a passenger last year. 3 more white passengers presented their boarding passes during this confrontation, and Heather waved them through with barely a glance, her performative thoroughness reserved solely for Gabrielle. "Let me see your boarding pass once more," Heather insisted, extending her hand again. Gabrielle complied, her patience wearing thin but her exterior remaining unruffled. "This is the 3rd time you've checked my boarding pass." "I'm just being thorough," Heather replied defensively. "It's my job to ensure everyone is in their proper place." The loaded phrase wasn't lost on Gabrielle or on Trevor, whose frown deepened as he continued recording. By now, word had reached the cockpit about a situation at boarding. Flight Captain Richard Peterson emerged from the cockpit to assess, his 6-foot frame and silver-streaked hair projecting authority as he approached. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his gaze shifting between Heather and Gabrielle. Before Gabrielle could respond, Heather jumped in. "I'm just verifying this passenger's boarding credentials, Captain. There seems to be some confusion about her seating assignment." "There's no confusion on my part," Gabrielle stated firmly. "The confusion appears to be with your flight attendant, who has checked my first-class boarding pass 3 times while allowing other passengers to board with barely a glance." Captain Peterson's expression remained neutral, but his posture subtly aligned with Heather rather than the passenger. "I'm sure Ms. Morris is just following protocol, ma'am. We take security very seriously." "Security, or profiling?" Gabrielle asked pointedly. The captain's expression hardened. "I'd advise against making accusations, ma'am. We're simply trying to ensure everyone has a pleasant flight." "A pleasant flight would begin with allowing me to board, as is my right as a ticketed first-class passenger," Gabrielle responded. By now, the boarding process had stalled completely. The line behind Gabrielle had grown, with some passengers muttering about the delay. Others were watching the confrontation with increasing interest, a few even recording with their phones. Karen Bennett, the wealthy white passenger who had boarded earlier, re-emerged from the jet bridge. "Excuse me, is there a problem here? Some of us have connections to make." She shot Gabrielle an impatient look, clearly assuming she was the source of the delay. "The problem," Gabrielle replied evenly, "is that I'm being prevented from boarding a flight for which I have a valid first-class ticket." Karen's eyes widened slightly in manufactured offense. "Well, I'm sure the airline has procedures for a reason. Perhaps you misunderstood your boarding group." Her emphasis on "you" left little doubt about her assumptions. "I understand perfectly," Gabrielle stated. "What I don't understand is why I'm being asked repeatedly to verify my ticket when others are not." Carlos, unable to remain silent any longer, stepped forward slightly. "Ms. Morris, I recognize Ms. Wilson. She's a regular on this route and a platinum member." Heather shot Carlos a warning glare. "Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, but I'm handling this." Trevor Hayes, still recording, had positioned himself to capture both Gabrielle's dignified responses and the increasingly uncomfortable reactions of the airline staff. The video would later show that during this entire exchange, Gabrielle never raised her voice, never became emotional, while Heather's body language and tone grew increasingly defensive and aggressive. "Perhaps," Gabrielle suggested calmly, "you could explain exactly what about my valid first-class boarding pass is causing such concern. Is there something specific you're looking for that you haven't found in your 3 examinations?" The pointed question hung in the air, the unspoken accusation clear to everyone watching. Heather's cheeks flushed. "I think you might be more comfortable in economy class," she suggested, her voice honeyed with false concern. "First class can be rather exclusive. Our economy section is quite comfortable as well." Gasps emerged from several witnesses. The Johnsons exchanged shocked glances. Trevor Hayes almost dropped his phone at the blatant statement. Gabrielle, however, remained outwardly calm while her mind calculated her next move. She noticed Trevor recording, recognized him from previous interviews, and made a strategic decision. This wouldn't be just another indignity to swallow silently. "I'm quite aware of what exclusive means in this context," she responded, her voice clear enough to be captured on any recording. "But I assure you, I'll be perfectly comfortable in the first-class seat I paid for." "Let me be crystal clear," Gabrielle said, reaching into her purse. "I am Gabrielle Wilson, CEO of Wilson Tech Solutions." She produced her company ID along with a business card featuring the distinctive blue and silver company logo. "I was on the cover of Forbes last quarter. Your airline uses my company's security software for your booking systems." Several passengers gasped audibly. Trevor Hayes zoomed in on Heather's face, capturing her momentary flash of panic before she regained her composure. "Well," Heather stammered, I still need to verify your boarding pass." "You verified it 3 times, Gabrielle stated flatly. "Will a 4th time somehow yield different results? Have you ever been in a situation where someone refused to recognize your accomplishments despite clear evidence?" Comment number 1 if you've experienced this kind of discrimination, and let me know how you handled it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience in the face of prejudice. Would you have maintained your composure like Gabrielle, or would you have responded differently? Captain Peterson, sensing a potentially volatile situation, intervened. Let's all calm down. MS. Wilson, was it? You can board now. Heather, please continue processing the other passengers. With visible reluctance, Heather handed back Gabrielle's boarding pass. Seat 4C, she said curtly. Gabrielle checked her boarding pass. My ticket is for 2A, not 4C. There must have been a last-minute change, Heather insisted. 4C is your assigned seat now. Gabrielle proceeded down the jet bridge, her mind racing. This deliberate seat reassignment was crossing from casual discrimination into something more calculated. She entered the aircraft, nodding politely to Carlos, who mouthed a silent, "I'm sorry," as she passed. First class was already nearly full. Gabrielle approached seat 2A, only to find Bradley Thompson, the smirking businessman from the boarding line, occupying it. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I believe you're in my seat." Bradley barely glanced up from his phone. "No, this is my seat. 2A. Perhaps there's been a confusion. My boarding pass is for 2A. Gabrielle showed him her ticket. "Well, mine is too," Bradley replied, finally looking up with thinly veiled contempt. "And I'm already settled. Why don't you take whatever seat they assigned you and stop causing problems?" Before Gabrielle could respond, Heather appeared at her side. "Is there an issue?" "This gentleman is in my assigned seat," Gabrielle explained calmly. Bradley shrugged. "I have a boarding pass for this seat. May I see it?" Gabrielle asked. "I don't have to show you anything," Bradley snapped. Heather interjected, "Ms. Wilson, as I mentioned, your seat has been changed to 4C. Please proceed there and stop disrupting the boarding process." "I'd like to see his boarding pass," Gabrielle insisted. "If we both have tickets for the same seat, there's been a mistake that needs to be rectified." "The mistake," Heather said coldly, "is your continued disruption of this flight." From across the aisle, an elderly voice spoke up. "That's not right." Martha Johnson, 78 and traveling with her husband Howard, leaned forward. "We saw this gentleman board after her, and he was assigned to 4C. We heard it clearly." Howard Johnson nodded in agreement. "That's correct. There's been a switch." Bradley's face reddened. "Mind your own business, old man." "There's no need for rudeness," Howard replied firmly. "We're simply stating what we observed." More passengers were watching now, the first-class cabin becoming a theater of uncomfortable tension. Gabrielle, seeing the situation escalating beyond productive resolution, made a decision. She calmly took out her phone. "I'm calling my executive assistant," she informed Heather. "This situation requires intervention." "Phones must be in airplane mode during boarding," Heather said automatically. "We're not even moving yet, and half the cabin is on their phones," Gabrielle pointed out, gesturing to several passengers, including Bradley, who were openly using their devices. She dialed Angela Martinez, her trusted executive assistant for the past 8 years. "Angela, I'm having an interesting situation on Coastal Airlines Flight 372 to San Francisco." She briefly explained the circumstances, speaking clearly enough for those nearby to hear. As Gabrielle spoke with Angela, Captain Peterson returned to the cabin, his expression now genuinely concerned. "What's the holdup now? We're already 15 minutes behind schedule." "This woman won't take her assigned seat," Heather explained quickly. "Because someone else has been placed in my ticketed seat," Gabrielle countered, "and your flight attendant is facilitating the deception." The captain looked between them, clearly wanting this problem to disappear. "Ma'am, at this point, does it really matter which first-class seat you have? They're all the same." "It matters because of the principle," Gabrielle replied evenly. "And because this treatment has been discriminatory from the start." "That's a serious accusation," the captain said stiffly. "It's an accurate one," Gabrielle responded. "I suggest you check the flight manifest again. Carefully. Something in her tone made the captain pause. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Gabrielle said clearly, "that your airline might want to be more careful about how it treats passengers, especially ones whose companies own 5% of your parent corporation's stock." The cabin fell silent. Trevor Hayes, who had moved to a position where he could still record, felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a viral moment in the making, this was potentially industry-changing. Bradley Thompson's smug expression faltered. Heather's face drained of color. The Johnsons exchanged satisfied glances. 5%. Captain Peterson repeated. Wilson Tech Partners acquired the shares last year, Gabrielle confirmed. It was in all the financial papers. We've been planning to increase our stake, depending on how we feel about the company culture and values. Trevor Hayes, sensing historic content, began live streaming the incident to his professional social media accounts. Within minutes, thousands of viewers were watching the confrontation unfold in real time. The first signs of panic flashed across Heather's face as the implications sank in. Captain Peterson's professional demeanor cracked slightly as he processed this new information. I wasn't aware," he stammered. "Clearly," Gabrielle replied. "Now, about my seat. Do you think Gabrielle should accept a different first-class seat to avoid further conflict, or stand her ground for the seat she rightfully purchased? Comment number 1 if you believe she should compromise for peace, or number 2 if you think she should demand what's rightfully hers. Like and subscribe to find out what happens next. How would you react if someone tried to take what was yours while others watched in silence?" With all eyes on her, Gabrielle maintained her composure as she pressed her phone to her ear. "Angela, please connect me with Timothy Reynolds." She paused. "Yes, Coastal Airlines CEO. We met at the charity gala last month. I believe he gave me his direct number." "Yes, that's the one." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin transformed instantly. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice the confrontation were now openly watching, some with newfound respect, others with growing discomfort. Captain Peterson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ms. Wilson, I'm sure we can resolve this without escalating to the executive level. This situation escalated the moment your staff decided to treat me differently than other passengers," Gabrielle replied, her voice measured but firm. "Hello, Timothy. Gabrielle Wilson here. I'm currently standing in the first-class cabin of your Flight 372 to San Francisco, experiencing what can only be described as discriminatory treatment." As she concisely explained the situation to the airline CEO, Bradley Thompson reluctantly gathered his belongings from seat 2A. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Some people are so entitled." "Thank you for finally moving to your actual assigned seat," Gabrielle said, covering the phone's microphone momentarily. As Bradley passed, he muttered under his breath, "Affirmative action seat." The slur wasn't quiet enough. Several passengers heard it, including the Johnsons and Trevor Hayes, who captured it clearly on his live stream. The number of viewers had already surpassed 50,000 and was climbing rapidly. Karen Bennett, seated across the aisle, wasn't ready to concede the battle. "This is holding up the entire flight," she complained loudly. "Some of us have important meetings to get to." "As do I," Gabrielle responded calmly. "A $500 million merger negotiation, specifically. Which is why I booked and paid for this particular seat months in advance." Karen flushed but continued her protest. She should be removed from the flight for causing such a disruption. Howard Johnson turned in his seat. The only disruption was caused by the airline staff and that man who took her seat. "I may be old, but I can still recognize injustice when I see it." Martha Johnson nodded in agreement. "We've been flying for over 50 years, and the treatment this young woman has received is shameful." Carlos Rodriguez, gathering courage from the shifting dynamic, approached Gabrielle with a glass of champagne. "Ms. Wilson, welcome aboard. I apologize for the confusion with your seat." can I get you anything else before takeoff? Heather watched from the galley, her expression a mixture of fear and resentment. The carefully constructed power structure she'd relied on was crumbling before her eyes. As Gabrielle took her rightful seat and continued her conversation with CEO Reynolds, her mind flashed back to her early days building Wilson Tech Solutions. The bank loan officers who wouldn't make eye contact. The potential clients who asked to speak to the person in charge even after she'd introduced herself as the founder. The venture capitalists who suggested she find a nice man to be the face of the company. Each of those moments had strengthened her resolve rather than weakened it. Each rejection had sharpened her strategic thinking. Each underestimation had fueled her determination to succeed not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. Yes, Timothy, she continued into the phone, I understand you weren't personally involved. But as CEO, you set the company culture. No, I'm not interested in free flights or upgrades. What I want is structural change. Heather, under direction from someone through her earpiece, approached with a forced smile. Ms. Wilson, please accept our sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding. If there's anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable. Gabrielle held up one finger, continuing her conversation with Reynolds. Heather stood awkwardly, her authority completely undermined. Within minutes, airline ground staff rushed aboard with gift baskets and handwritten apology letters that had been hastily prepared. The operations manager, sweating in his suit, personally came to express regret for the unfortunate situation. The Johnsons, witnessing this dramatic shift, shared a knowing look. Martha leaned across the aisle toward Gabrielle. My husband and I were both civil rights activists in the 60s, she said quietly. Some things change, some don't. But watching you stand your ground gives me hope. Trevor's live stream comments section was exploding with reactions. Hashtag Coastal Airlines racism began trending, with viewers sharing their own experiences of discrimination on flights. Angela texted Gabrielle, Twitter is on fire. Hashtag Coastal Airlines racism trending in 17 cities. 100K plus mentions in 15 minutes. CNN reaching out for comment. Gabrielle considered her next move carefully. This moment wasn't just about her seat or her dignity. It was about leveraging her position to create change for those who didn't have her resources or platform. It was about turning personal humiliation into collective empowerment. She smiled at the Johnsons. Thank you for speaking up. Most people find it easier to stay silent. We learned long ago that silence solves nothing, Howard replied. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing, as they say. As Carlos served her champagne, he whispered, thank you for standing up. You have no idea what it's like working here for some of us. Gabrielle nodded slightly, filing away this information. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's bias, it was about systemic issues throughout the organization. Bradley Thompson and Karen Bennett huddled together, whispering and occasionally glancing at Gabrielle with undisguised hostility. Their world of unchallenged privilege was experiencing turbulence, and they didn't like it one bit. Gabrielle took a sip of champagne, her mind already formulating a strategy that would extend far beyond this flight. The Airbus A320 finally pushed back from the gate, 45 minutes behind schedule. In the cockpit, Captain Peterson made a terse announcement apologizing for the delay without specifying its cause. The tension in first class remained palpable as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Meanwhile, at Coastal Airlines headquarters in Dallas, chaos erupted. CEO Timothy Reynolds had assembled an emergency crisis management team in the executive conference room, his face grim as he addressed the gathered executives. The live stream has over 200,000 viewers and climbing, reported Jennifer Adams, the head of digital communications. It's being picked up by major news outlets. We're seeing the hashtag Coastal Airlines racism trending nationwide. This is a PR nightmare, groaned marketing director Paul Winters. Wilson Tech Solutions is one of the most respected companies in America, and Gabrielle Wilson has a spotless reputation. She mentors young women of color in STEM, donates millions to education initiatives, and has a massive following. Timothy Reynolds paced the room, his Italian leather shoes wearing a path in the plush carpet. How did this happen? How did not one but multiple staff members fail to recognize one of our major shareholders, who happens to be on the cover of every business magazine this year? Vanessa Clark, the airline's only black executive and senior vice president of customer experience, had been warning about these issues for years. "This isn't an isolated incident, Tim," she said firmly. "I've been bringing diversity and inclusion concerns to this table for 3 years. Remember the training program I proposed last quarter that was deemed unnecessary and too expensive?" Reynolds had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That's not relevant right now, Vanessa. We need to focus on damage control." "This is damage control," Vanessa insisted. "We're seeing the consequences of ignoring systematic problems. 3 discrimination lawsuits in 5 years, all quietly settled. Diversity statistics that haven't improved since 2010. A corporate culture that rewards people like Heather Morris while marginalizing employees like Carlos Rodriguez." The PR team was frantically drafting statements, testing different approaches to minimize the fallout. "We could emphasize that this was an isolated incident, not reflective of our values," suggested one junior staff member. "Except it's not isolated, and claiming it is would be dishonest," Vanessa countered. "Wilson will see right through that, and so will the public." Back on the aircraft, now cruising at 35,000 feet, Carlos found a moment to speak privately with Gabrielle as he refilled her water glass. "Ms. Wilson," he said quietly, "I want you to know that Heather has a history of this behavior. Last year, she reported a black flight attendant for insubordination when he questioned her similar treatment of a minority passenger. He was terminated during his probation period." Gabrielle listened intently. "Thank you for telling me this, Carlos. Has anyone formally documented these incidents?" "We're afraid to," Carlos admitted. "Coastal Airlines has a reputation for retaliating against whistleblowers. But many of us have been keeping personal records, hoping someday something would change." As they spoke, Captain Peterson's voice came over the intercom, an awkward attempt at damage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. On behalf of Coastal Airlines, I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure. We at Coastal value all our passengers equally and strive to provide excellent service to everyone. If there have been any misunderstandings today, we deeply regret them." The half-hearted apology hung in the air, fooling no one. Gabrielle turned to her laptop, pulling up documents about Coastal Airlines that her assistant had sent. The company's diversity statistics were abysmal compared to industry standards. Their board of directors included 12 white men, 1 white woman, and 0 people of color. Their executive leadership wasn't much better. Gabrielle recalled a similar incident 3 years ago, when Dr. Raymond Washington, a prominent black surgeon, had been removed from a Coastal Airlines flight after a white passenger complained about feeling uncomfortable sitting next to him. The airline had settled the case quietly, and the story had disappeared from the news cycle within days. Across the aisle, Bradley Thompson and Karen Bennett whispered urgently, stealing glances at Trevor Hayes, who continued to document the unfolding situation. They were beginning to realize that their behavior might not remain anonymous, that their faces and actions might become public in a story that was rapidly gaining national attention. Heather remained in the galley, having been instructed by the chief flight attendant via intercom to minimize contact with the first-class cabin, particularly with Gabrielle. She was frantically texting her union representative, claiming she was being unfairly targeted for doing her job. In the meantime, the Johnsons had begun quietly organizing a passenger coalition. Howard, a retired civil rights attorney, was collecting contact information from witnesses willing to provide statements about what they'd observed. Martha, who had served on the boards of several nonprofits, was outlining potential demands for systemic changes at the airline. At headquarters, the crisis continued to escalate. Reynolds received updates that the story had been picked up by the New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC. The company's stock had dropped 3 points in the first 30 minutes of trading after the story broke. "We need to get ahead of this," Reynolds insisted. "Prepare the corporate jet. I'll meet Wilson when she lands in San Francisco." Vanessa Clark shook her head. "A grand gesture won't fix this, Tim. We need comprehensive changes to our training, hiring practices, and corporate culture." "We can discuss those later," Reynolds dismissed. "Right now, we need to contain the PR damage." "That thinking is exactly how we ended up here," Vanessa responded. "Treating symptoms while ignoring the disease." As the conversation at headquarters continued, Gabrielle worked steadily on her laptop, reviewing not just Coastal Airlines policies and history, but also preparing for her upcoming merger negotiations. This incident would not derail her business objectives, though it might significantly alter her approach to the deal, particularly since the potential merger partner had extensive contracts with Coastal. The first-class cabin had divided itself into clear factions, those supporting Gabrielle, led by the Johnsons, those allied with Bradley and Karen, primarily white executives who avoided making eye contact with anyone, and those trying desperately to remain neutral, burying themselves in magazines or pretending to sleep. The battle lines were drawn, but the war was just beginning. For Gabrielle, this had transcended a personal affront and transformed into something much larger, an opportunity to force meaningful change in an industry that had resisted it for too long. Midway through the flight, Trevor Hayes's live stream reached a milestone that even he, an experienced journalist, found staggering. 500,000 concurrent viewers. His professional social media accounts were gaining thousands of followers per minute as the story of Gabrielle Wilson's treatment spread like wildfire across the internet. Major news networks had picked up the story, with breaking news banners flashing across screens nationwide. Black billionaire CEO denied rightful seat on Coastal Airlines, discrimination at 30,000 feet, Wilson Tech CEO faces racism on Coastal flight. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Wilson Tech Solutions stock rose 3.5% as public support rallied behind Gabrielle, while Coastal Airlines shares plummeted nearly 8% in just 2 hours of trading. Institutional investors were calling emergency meetings to discuss the potential long-term implications for the airline. Gabrielle's phone buzzed constantly with notifications despite the spotty in-flight Wi-Fi. She had received over 300 text messages and emails from other Black executives and entrepreneurs sharing similar experiences of discrimination in travel, hospitality, and business settings. "This happens to me every time I fly first class," wrote the CEO of a major advertising agency. "I was asked to show my ticket 5 times at the Four Seasons last month," shared a renowned neurosurgeon. "Thank you for standing your ground when so many of us feel forced to swallow these indignities," messaged the founder of a successful cosmetics line. "What's your response when witnessing discrimination? Comment number 1 if you speak up like the Johnsons, number 2 if you tend to stay silent, or number 3 if you've been the target of such treatment yourself." Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of courage in the face of injustice. Would you have had the strength to remain as composed as Gabrielle while being humiliated in public? Angela Martinez, working tirelessly from Gabrielle's Atlanta office, sent a critical update. CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business all requesting interviews when you land. "I've arranged for security and organized an impromptu press conference at SFO. Your choice whether to participate." Gabrielle considered the strategic implications. A press conference would amplify the message but might distract from her merger negotiations. Yet the unexpected spotlight provided leverage that couldn't be ignored. "Confirm the press conference," she texted back. "Coordinate with legal to draft a statement focusing on systematic issues, not just my experience. This isn't about me, it's about changing an industry." As Gabrielle strategized, her mind drifted to Eleanor Washington, her first mentor and the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. 20 years ago, Eleanor had faced much worse discrimination as one of the first Black female executives in the tech industry. She'd endured harassment, exclusion, and countless microaggressions, yet had remained determined to succeed not just for herself but for those who would follow. When they try to humiliate you, Eleanor had once told her, that's when you must be most dignified. Not because they deserve your grace, but because you deserve to maintain your power. In the airplane's lavatory, Heather Morris splashed cold water on her face, trying to control her panic. She'd locked herself in for nearly 15 minutes, ignoring repeated calls on the crew intercom. Her entire career flashed before her eyes, 30 years of service potentially ending in disgrace because of what she still couldn't admit was discriminatory behavior. In her mind, she had simply been following procedures and maintaining standards. The possibility that those standards were selectively applied had never entered her consciousness. Meanwhile, Carlos Rodriguez had made a life-altering decision. During a brief break, he'd emailed Vanessa Clark, whom he'd met at a company diversity initiative, sharing his documented observations of discriminatory practices he'd witnessed during his employment. Today's incident with Ms. Wilson is not isolated, he wrote. I'm prepared to come forward with specific examples and dates. Back in the first-class cabin, Trevor Hayes was working on his laptop between updates to his live stream. The article he was drafting had evolved from a simple account of the incident to an in-depth investigation of Coastal Airlines' history of discrimination claims and their corporate culture. Timothy Reynolds, still in crisis mode at headquarters, had recorded an emergency video statement that the communications team was frantically editing. His initial response, filled with corporate platitudes about investigating the incident and reaffirming commitment to diversity, had been rejected by the legal team as insufficient given the severity and public nature of the situation. We need something stronger, insisted Vanessa Clark. Concrete actions, not just words. Vague promises will only make this worse. In response, Gabrielle was drafting her own list of demands for systematic change at the airline. 1. Independent audit of all discrimination complaints over the past decade. 2. Mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. 3. Revised hiring practices to increase diversity at all levels. 4. Clear, public consequences for employees who engage in discriminatory behavior. 5. Creation of a passenger Bill of Rights with specific protections against discrimination. 6. Appointment of a Chief Diversity Officer reporting directly to the CEO. 7. Public release of diversity statistics and improvement goals. The Johnsons continued their quiet organizing, collecting contact information from 16 passengers willing to provide formal statements about what they'd witnessed. Their decades of civil rights activism had prepared them for this moment, and they moved with practiced efficiency, documenting details while memories were fresh. This reminds me of the lunch counter protests, Howard told Martha quietly. Different decade, same struggle. Karen Bennett, realizing belatedly that her identity might be exposed through the viral video, attempted to delete her social media accounts during the flight. She hadn't considered that internet sleuths had already captured screenshots of her profiles, including her workplace information and history of problematic comments on other racial incidents. Bradley Thompson, equally concerned about potential blowback, feigned sleep while secretly messaging his PR team to prepare for possible identification and public criticism. His muttered slur about affirmative action had been clearly captured on Trevor's live stream, and commenters were already attempting to identify him. What none of the passengers knew was that previous discrimination lawsuits against Coastal Airlines had uncovered a troubling pattern. Internal emails obtained during discovery had revealed communications between managers discussing ways to maintain our preferred clientele and preserve the premium experience, coded language for catering to wealthy white passengers at the expense of minorities, even those with equivalent status and resources. These documents had been sealed as part of settlement agreements, but journalists were already filing Freedom of Information Act requests and contacting former employees who might not be bound by non-disclosure agreements. As the flight continued toward San Francisco, the story expanded far beyond one incident on one flight. It had become a referendum on how America's corporate culture treated successful black professionals, and the systemic issues that remained deeply entrenched despite decades of purported progress. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight 372 began its final descent into San Francisco International Airport. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach. Local time is 11:22 a.m., and the weather is clear with a temperature of 68 degrees. We'll be arriving at Gate C-42. What he didn't announce was the unprecedented scene awaiting them. Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see an unusual number of vehicles on the tarmac, news vans with satellite dishes, airport security cars, and even a sleek corporate jet with the Coastal Airlines logo. Gabrielle remained focused on her laptop until the final announcement to stow electronic devices. She had spent the last hour refining her statement and coordinating with her legal team. This moment would define not just her response to personal discrimination, but potentially reshape policies affecting thousands of travelers. As the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the gate, Trevor Hayes provided one final update to his live stream, which now had over 1 million total viewers. We're landing in San Francisco, where I'm told Coastal Airlines executives and media are waiting. This story has clearly struck a nerve nationwide, highlighting experiences many travelers of color face regularly but rarely receive public attention. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the usual shuffle to retrieve belongings. Captain Peterson's voice came over the intercom once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated momentarily to allow our first-class passengers to deplane first. The standard announcement carried extra weight given the circumstances. Heather, who had emerged from hiding only for the landing preparations, stood stiffly by the forward cabin door, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Gabrielle. Carlos positioned himself to open the aircraft door, providing a buffer between Heather and the passengers. As the jet bridge connected with a soft thump, Carlos turned to Gabrielle. "Ms. Wilson, there appears to be quite a reception waiting. Would you like to deplane first, or would you prefer a moment to prepare?" "Thank you, Carlos," Gabrielle replied with a warm smile. "I appreciate your professionalism throughout this flight. I'm ready now." The aircraft door swung open to reveal a scene unlike any regular deplaning. Timothy Reynolds stood at the front of a group of Coastal Airlines executives, their forced smiles barely masking their anxiety. Behind them, a wall of journalists and camera operators jostled for position. Gabrielle emerged from the aircraft with the dignified bearing that had made her a legend in business circles. She wore no smug expression of victory, no visible anger, just the composed demeanor of someone who had faced this battle many times before. "Ms. Wilson," Timothy Reynolds stepped forward, hand extended. "On behalf of Coastal Airlines, I want to personally apologize for your experience today." The cameras captured the moment as Gabrielle briefly shook his hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reynolds. I look forward to a productive conversation about systematic changes at Coastal Airlines. This isn't about one incident or one employee, but about a culture that needs transformation." Her measured response, neither accepting the apology nor escalating the confrontation, left Reynolds visibly off balance. He had prepared for either gratitude for his personal appearance or an angry confrontation, not this calm call for institutional change. As Gabrielle moved toward the terminal, another black woman approached through the crowd. Diane Foster, CEO of Foster Financial and one of the few other black female CEOs in America, had flown in specifically to show solidarity. "Gabrielle," she embraced her colleague. "When I saw what was happening, I knew I needed to be here. This isn't just your fight." The two powerful executives walking together created an iconic image that would appear on business publications for weeks to come. Behind them, Bradley Thompson and Karen Bennett attempted to slip out unnoticed, but several journalists had been briefed on their roles in the incident. "Sir. Were you the passenger who took Ms. Wilson's seat?" "Ma'am. Did you call for her removal from the flight?" They hurried away, heads down, as airport security created a path for them to exit without comment. The Johnsons emerged next, immediately surrounded by reporters who had learned of their role as key witnesses. Howard, drawing on his experience as a civil rights attorney, spoke with practiced clarity. "What we witnessed today was a textbook case of discriminatory treatment," he stated firmly. "My wife and I have seen this pattern for decades. The only difference is that today, the target had the resources and platform to fight back." Martha added, "We've collected statements from 16 passengers willing to testify about what they observed. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate pattern of behavior." Carlos Rodriguez, after completing his duties on the aircraft, made the most difficult decision of his career. He approached Vanessa Clark, who stood slightly apart from the other executives. "Ms. Clark," he said quietly, "I'm prepared to provide detailed information about similar incidents I've witnessed during my employment. Whatever the consequences." Vanessa nodded solemnly. "Thank you for your courage, Carlos. I'll make sure you're protected." Meanwhile, Gabrielle had reached the impromptu press conference area. With cameras rolling and microphones thrust forward, she delivered a composed and powerful statement that transcended the personal affront she had experienced. "What happened today happens to black travelers every day, though rarely with witnesses or consequences," she began. "The difference isn't that I experienced discrimination, the difference is that I have the platform to demand change because of it." She outlined specific reforms needed in the airline industry and corporate America more broadly, speaking not with anger but with the authoritative clarity that had made her a successful CEO. "This isn't about seeking punishment or compensation," she emphasized. "It's about creating systems that prevent these incidents rather than merely responding to them after the fact." As Gabrielle spoke, an unexpected revelation emerged. She had been recording all interactions after the initial confrontation using her smartphone's audio recorder, standard practice for her in potentially problematic business situations. "I have complete audio documentation of today's events," she informed the press. "Not to pursue legal action, but to ensure there can be no minimizing or denying what occurred." The final bombshell came when Gabrielle addressed the business implications. "In light of today's events, I am reconsidering Wilson Tech Solutions' planned merger with Datacraft Systems, given their extensive partnership with Coastal Airlines. I cannot in good conscience align our company with partners who don't share our values of dignity and equality." The statement sent immediate shockwaves through the business world. Datacraft stock dropped 5 points within minutes, while Coastal Airlines shares continued their downward spiral. Social media response had reached unprecedented levels, with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders weighing in. The hashtags #FirstClassWhileBlack and #Coastal Airlines Racism dominated trending lists nationwide. As the press conference concluded, Gabrielle's mind turned to her late father, who had driven a taxi for 30 years while saving to help fund her education. "Never let anyone treat you as less than what you are," he had told her repeatedly. "Your dignity isn't negotiable." Today, she had honored that promise in a way that would create ripples far beyond one flight or one airline. 3 days after the incident, Gabrielle convened an emergency meeting with her executive team and PR department in Wilson Tech Solutions Atlanta headquarters. The sleek conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, buzzed with energy and purpose. "This isn't just about responding to what happened to me," Gabrielle explained, standing at the head of the polished mahogany table. "This is about leveraging this moment to create industry-wide change." Angela Martinez, who hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since the incident, presented the latest metrics. The video has been viewed over 30 million times across platforms. "We've received partnership inquiries from civil rights organizations, diversity consultants, and 3 major airlines wanting to demonstrate they're not like Coastal." Jessica Palmer, Wilson Tech's chief marketing officer, outlined their strategic approach. "We're launching the #FirstClassWhileBlack campaign to highlight similar experiences and push for industry-wide reforms. We've already collected over 5,000 testimonials from black executives, celebrities, and everyday travelers. The campaign would include a dedicated website where people could share their experiences, a series of testimonial videos featuring prominent black leaders, and a comprehensive set of proposed industry standards for equitable treatment." Meanwhile, Coastal Airlines was in crisis mode. Their stock had dropped 15% by the end of the trading day following the incident, wiping out nearly $1.2 billion in market value. Institutional investors were demanding emergency board meetings to discuss leadership changes. Timothy Reynolds had called Gabrielle 6 times, escalating his offers with each conversation. The initial proposal of complimentary flights was quickly replaced by offers of financial compensation, then a seat on the company's board, and finally a desperate plea for guidance on how to salvage the situation. "I don't want your money," Gabrielle had told him firmly during their most recent call. "I want structural changes that will prevent this from happening to anyone else." Her list of demands included, 1. Comprehensive audit of all customer-facing policies by an independent diversity consultant. 2. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, with regular refreshers. 3. Revised hiring and promotion practices to increase diversity at all levels. 4. Creation of an independent review board for discrimination complaints. 5. Public reporting of diversity metrics and progress toward goals. 6. Promotion of Vanessa Clark to a newly created position of Chief Diversity Officer. Reynolds had no choice but to agree to all 6 demands, though he had tried to negotiate timelines and implementation details. Trevor Hayes's explosive article had been published in the Digital Edge, providing evidence that Coastal Airlines had systematically buried discrimination complaints for years. His reporting included testimony from former employees and previously undisclosed settlement details that his legal team had deemed safe to publish. The story was more damaging than anything Coastal's executives had feared. Internal emails revealed discussions about maintaining the premium experience by catering to traditional first-class demographics, thinly veiled code for white, wealthy passengers. Vanessa Clark, seizing the moment of leverage, had successfully advocated for a complete overhaul of the airline's diversity initiatives. With Reynolds desperate to demonstrate commitment to change, she had secured a budget 5 times larger than her previous rejected proposals. The consequences for the individuals involved were swift and significant. Heather Morris had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, though she was fighting termination through her union, claiming she had simply followed procedures. Bradley Thompson, identified by internet sleuths within hours of the video going viral, was facing his own professional crisis. As CFO of a mid-sized investment firm, his caught-on-camera behavior had triggered an emergency board meeting to discuss whether his actions violated the company's code of conduct. Karen Bennett, whose real estate license and contact information had been uncovered by social media users, had temporarily closed her office after receiving hundreds of negative reviews and cancellations from clients who didn't want to be associated with her behavior. The Johnsons had become unexpected celebrities in their own right. Their eloquent testimony and decades of civil rights experience made them valuable voices in the unfolding conversation. They had accepted an invitation to form a senior citizens advocacy group against discrimination, funded by a coalition of civil rights organizations. Captain Peterson had issued a public apology for his handling of the situation, acknowledging that he had defaulted to supporting his crew without properly investigating the circumstances. He had requested to be included in the first group of employees to receive the new diversity training. As Gabrielle's team finalized their strategy, she focused on leveraging the merger negotiations to force broader change. Datacraft Systems, desperate to salvage the potential deal, had agreed to audit their own partnerships and vendor relationships for diversity compliance. "We're not just changing one airline," Gabrielle told her team. "We're putting every company on notice that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a business imperative with real consequences when ignored." The meeting concluded with a clear action plan, timelines, and accountability measures. As the executives filed out, Gabrielle remained at the table, momentarily alone with her thoughts. She remembered being 7 years old, the only black child in an advanced math class, when the teacher had suggested she might be more comfortable in the standard class despite her perfect test scores. Her mother had fought fiercely for her to remain, setting the pattern for a lifetime of having to prove she belonged in spaces where people who looked like her were rare. "This isn't about revenge," she whispered to herself. "This is about making sure the next generation fights fewer of these battles." With renewed determination, she gathered her materials and prepared for her next meeting. The work of transformation had only just begun. 6 months ago, I stood in a boarding line being told I didn't belong in first class, Gabrielle Wilson began, her voice resonating through the convention center ballroom. Today, I stand before you discussing how that 90-second confrontation has catalyzed industry-wide transformation. The Aviation Industry Diversity Conference had selected Gabrielle as their keynote speaker, with over 2,000 executives, HR professionals, and customer service leaders hanging on her every word. The stage backdrop featured the now iconic image of Gabrielle and Diane Foster walking together through San Francisco International Airport, a photo that had come to symbolize Black excellence and solidarity in corporate America. Transformation isn't about punishing individuals, she continued. It's about examining and rebuilding systems that allow bias to flourish unchecked. In the 6 months since the incident, Coastal Airlines had undergone a remarkable evolution under Vanessa Clark's leadership. Promoted to Executive Vice President of Culture and Inclusion, Vanessa had implemented comprehensive training programs, revised hiring practices, and established clear accountability measures for discriminatory behavior. The airline's customer satisfaction scores, after an initial dip following the incident, had risen to their highest level in a decade. Employee retention had improved, particularly among minority staff who reported feeling more valued and supported. Carlos Rodriguez, recognized for his courage in speaking up, had been promoted to senior cabin crew trainer with a special focus on anti-bias procedures. His curriculum was being adopted by 3 other major airlines who wanted to demonstrate their commitment to equitable treatment. Cultural change doesn't happen overnight, Carlos explained in a video testimonial played during Gabrielle's presentation. But it does happen when brave individuals stand up and organizations genuinely commit to improvement. The Johnsons, Martha and Howard, had become powerful advocates in their own right. Their newly formed senior citizens advocacy group, Gray Hair, Bold Voices, had already partnered with 5 major travel and hospitality companies to address discrimination against older travelers, particularly those of color. We've been fighting this fight for 60 years, Howard shared during a panel discussion. The methods change, but the principle remains the same: dignity and respect for every human being, regardless of their appearance. Even those on the wrong side of the incident had experienced transformative journeys. Bradley Thompson, after initially fighting the characterization of his behavior as racist, had undergone a public reckoning after losing his CFO position. His journey from defensive denial to genuine understanding had been documented in a surprisingly candid LinkedIn article that went viral in business circles. "I never considered myself racist," he had written. "But my actions that day revealed biases I hadn't examined. Losing my job was painful, but it forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and my assumptions." Karen Bennett had taken a different path to redemption. After closing her real estate practice amid the backlash, she had enrolled in diversity education courses and eventually partnered with a Black-owned real estate firm to better serve diverse communities in her area. Her transformation, while initially motivated by business necessity, had evolved into genuine growth. Perhaps most surprisingly, Heather Morris had undergone her own evolution. After initially fighting her termination through her union, she had reached a settlement that included mandatory bias training. The experience proved unexpectedly enlightening, leading her to recognize patterns in her behavior that she had never previously questioned. "I always saw myself as just following the rules," she admitted in a written statement. "I never stopped to ask why I applied those rules differently depending on who was in front of me." The aviation industry as a whole had been forced to confront its history of discrimination. 2 other major airlines had proactively launched their own diversity initiatives, eager to avoid becoming the next Coastal. Industry associations had revised their training standards and customer service guidelines to explicitly address unconscious bias. Gabrielle's company had played a central role in this transformation. Wilson Tech Solutions had launched a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation and hospitality, funding the education of 50 students in its first year. Their hashtag #FirstClassWhileBlack campaign had collected over 50,000 testimonials, creating an undeniable record of the pervasive nature of travel discrimination. Trevor Hayes, whose live stream had brought the incident to national attention, was now writing a book about the experience and the subsequent movement it sparked. What made this story different, he explained during an interview, was that it perfectly captured the reality that even extraordinary success doesn't shield Black Americans from ordinary discrimination. As Gabrielle's keynote address neared its conclusion, she shared a final anecdote. "Last week, I boarded another Coastal Airlines flight," she told the audience. The difference was palpable. The diverse crew greeted every passenger with the same respect. The boarding process was efficient and dignified. And when I took my seat in 2A, no one questioned whether I belonged there. She paused, allowing the significance to sink in. That's the transformation we're seeking, not special treatment, but equal treatment. Not exceptions, but a new standard. Timothy Reynolds, who had initially approached the situation as a PR crisis to be managed, had come to recognize it as a business imperative that ultimately strengthened the airline. "The incident forced us to address issues we had been avoiding," he acknowledged in a joint interview with Vanessa Clark. "While I wish it hadn't happened the way it did, the resulting changes have made us a better company." The friendship that had formed between Gabrielle and the Johnsons perhaps best symbolized the unexpected connections born from conflict. The elderly couple had become regular dinner guests at Gabrielle's home, sharing stories of their civil rights activism and offering perspective on how far America had come, and how far it still needed to go. "Change happens in 90-second increments," Gabrielle concluded her speech. "Moments of courage, followed by months of hard work. Individual stands that lead to institutional transformation. That's how we build a world where everyone can claim their rightful seat at any table, or on any airplane." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. As the applause finally subsided, Gabrielle offered a final thought: "The question isn't whether discrimination will occur, it's how we respond when it does. Do we accept it as inevitable, or do we use each incident as an opportunity to create lasting change?" Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Or have you been the person brave enough to say something? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire others to find their voice. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of transformation. Remember, change begins with each of us deciding that dignity isn't negotiable. Thank you for listening, and may we all have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. This story illustrates how discrimination persists even for those who have reached the pinnacle of success. Gabrielle Wilson faced the same prejudices as countless other Black travelers despite her billions and achievements. Yet the true lesson lies in her response, maintaining dignity while refusing to accept injustice. Power comes not just from wealth or position, but from strategically using your platform to create systemic change. By focusing on institutional transformation rather than personal vindication, Gabrielle turned a humiliating moment into a catalyst for industry-wide progress. The Johnsons demonstrate that being an ally means speaking up when witnessing discrimination, regardless of age or circumstance. Carlos shows that internal advocacy, though risky, is essential for organizational change. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals how discrimination isn't always deliberate hatred, but often unconscious bias embedded in standard procedures and following the rules. Real change requires examining these systems, not just changing individual hearts and minds. The 90 seconds that transformed an industry remind us that change happens when preparation meets opportunity, when someone with the resources to fight back decides that enough is enough, not just for themselves, but for everyone who will come after them. Has discrimination ever touched your life, whether as a target, a witness, or even someone who later recognized their own bias? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story could be the spark that inspires someone else to speak up next time. If you believe in a world where everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and accountability. Thank you for listening, and remember, change begins with recognizing injustice, continues with brave action, and is sustained through persistent advocacy. Together, we can create a more equitable world, one difficult conversation at a time.